each one of you sitting in this room, each one of us on this earth, everybody, everything begins with the soul. When you learn Chassidus, when you learn Jewish mysticism, you learn about the spiritual, about the esoteric, that's the first thing you know. Everything begins with the soul. The body comes second. We don't think that way. You wake up in the morning, first you feel your body before you feel your soul. You feel you're hungry, tired, all the other human experiences, material experiences. Then you focus and you say, okay, Moda'ani, God return my soul to me. Because we're essentially, on the ostensible level, we're sensory human beings who are consumed with our senses. What we see, what we hear, what we taste, touch, and smell. To the point that if I said to you right now, as an exercise, close your eyes and ears and taste, touch, and smell. Keep your ears open a bit because you won't hear me if you don't do that. What do you think would happen to you? So initially we think, I'll just disappear. No, you wouldn't disappear. You discover the real you. The you that's not stimulated by your senses. Because you don't need eyes to see yourself. You don't need ears to hear yourself. You don't need smell, taste, and touch to experience yourself. That's a bridge that connects us together. And we need it. It's necessary for relationships. In many ways, you can even say Shabbos is really an exercise of a journey within where we try to shut down that stimulation as much as possible, as much as humanly possible, because at the end of the day, we are still in bodies, and try to experience that voice from within. Every meditation, every exercise you find today, mindfulness, all those are all trying to do that, create a focus to travel inward. So when you know that's your real core essence, then ask yourself, how much do you know about it? Even the human body, which is just 5 feet, 6 feet tall, approximately, 100, 150 pounds. We won't go higher than that. Sometimes a little more. How much do we know about this body? So we know a lot more than we used to know, but there's still the mysteries. Ask any expert, any doctor, any scientist. The brain, the size of the palm of our hand. How much do we know about this brain? And that's the physical brain. When you talk about the soul, we know far, far less. And we spend most of our lives, if at all, studying science, studying the body, studying the physical world, studying the science of the physical world. But how much time have we spent understanding the dynamics and the components that make up your soul, which is the real you, the essence of you? So in a way, you can say Kabbalah and Chassidus, which is essentially contemporary Kabbalah, is the study of the soul. It's like you go to a doctor, you get a CAT scan or an X-ray or other types of scans of the body so we can see what makes us tick. And if there's a problem, we can discover it, identify it. There's also a thing called an X-ray of the soul. So I want to go through that X-ray a little more detail. Obviously, to cover it exhaustively would be difficult in this short time, but enough that hopefully it'll be intriguing enough for you to want to study more about it. Now, many of you may have studied some of this and maybe know it quite well. So it's not going to be just basic ABCs, but actually really digging into what you are comprised of, the building blocks of your very being, hence the DNA of your soul. And there is a real DNA. It's just not physical. Just like we say that the world is made up of many different objects, and they are in turn made up of elements, which in turn are made up of molecules, which are comprised of atoms and subatomic particles and sub-subatomic. You can keep going down the rabbit hole, and we don't even know how far it goes. The same is with the soul. There's the outer expression of it, and as you travel inward, you can go into the molecular level, into the atomic level, and the subatomic level. And people who are really on a spiritual journey have mastered, to some extent, that ability to go deeper within. The truth is prayer. Real prayer is a journey of the soul. It's not just lip service. It's not just words and just asking and beseeching God for your needs. It's a journey into those deeper dimensions. That's why it's not a surprise. I witnessed it not so often, but I've seen Hasidic Jews, rabbis, sitting under a talus on Shabbos for 6 hours davening. Now, it takes a lot less than 6 hours to read all those words. You see, you just go to any usual minyan. But because they weren't just saying words, they were going on a journey into these deeper places and deeper states of consciousness. So I'm going to break it down into a few parts here. First of all, the dimensions of the soul. There are dimensions, and you begin from the outer and you travel inward, literally exactly like I just defined, from the subatomic through the molecular, through the atomic, molecular, and all the way to the elemental level. The same thing is on the soul, that there's generally 5 dimensions. And you may have heard of them. I'll spell them out in Hebrew. They're called Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. So the Medrash puts it this way, that the soul has 5 names. But it really means 5 levels, 5 dimensions. So on the external, on the surface level, they sound synonymous. But when you understand what they are, they're not at all synonymous. They're different dimensions, and I'll explain it in more detail. So let's start from the bottom up, or from the outer in, would be the better way to put it. There's the level of soul when someone says, what does it mean to be alive? So any layperson, and definitely a biologist or a doctor or a scientist will tell you, it means life is defined, you're breathing, the primary organs are functioning, the heart, the mind, and that defines life. Now, that doesn't tell you the quality of life. It just tells you that you're physically alive. A person, God forbid, can be a vegetable in the hospital and also be alive. So that we would call biological life. That would be the first level nefesh, that you're simply existing and living. You're a living organism. Then there's the next level, that you're not just a zombie, but you also have an emotional life. Feelings. You feel things. You know, some people walk around, they say, yeah, I'm physically alive, but I feel dead, half dead. I feel like a zombie, like I said. What does that mean? No sensations. There's no feelings. So the next level is ruach, it's emotional life. The third is neshama, intellectual life, which is that your mind is working, your mind is stimulated, your mind is active. Sometimes we feel emotions but you feel your mind is blocked. Those are the first 3. Those are what we'll call the conscious dimensions of the soul, the conscious expression of the soul. Then come 2 more, Chaya and Yechida. We'll call this the supraconscious. This is called the transcendent forces at work that are not quite tangible in the sense where you can say, okay, it's expressing through intellectual activity or emotional or, as I said, biological, but rather they're dealing now with something more transcendent. Like here would be, what is the meaning of your life, as I discussed earlier. And finally, Yechida would be the level that is the place where you're closest to the very core essence of who you are, like being at peace with yourself in that deepest place. It's the most intimate part of the soul and its connection with its divine source. And it's not really experienced in any conscious way, but it's there. To access that is obviously far more difficult than the first levels. So those are part of the map of the general structure of a human soul. So when it says in the Bible, in the Torah, it says that God took a clump of earth and imbued it, he breathed into it divine energy, which is the divine energy of divine breath. He actually imbued it with everything I described earlier. So let's go back to the analogy of the composer. You'll see 2 different musicians playing a brilliant piece of music. And one sounds unbelievable, the other one sounds not bad. Same music. So that same music can be played with different levels of soul, with different levels of what we may call kavanah, intention. That's an example. So you could go through the motions, but you're not really living up to your entire potential. So simply put, we go through our days, our lives. In Hasidic thought, it will teach us that you don't just eat a meal. When you're eating a meal, all 5 levels of your soul should be interacting, which means you're not just eating to survive and keep your body healthy. You're also here to allow it to feed your emotional side of your being and your intellectual side and ultimately your transcendent side. So in other words, it infuses everything we do with a whole different dimension. So just by stating that already changes a person's attitude to life. It creates excitement. Everything you do is filled with this potent energy of your soul. When people ask the question about what you saw, for example, I sat at the feet of the Rebbe for many years. As you may know, that was my job, to remember the Rebbe's talks on Shabbos and holidays, retain it, and then repeat it, and then publish it. So what did you experience? You experienced a soul on fire. When you see people that we say they have the sparkle in the eye, a certain passion. It's not just a passion about big things. Every little detail comes alive. You know, when you love somebody, even a slight touch is electric because it's filled with neshama. But our lives, I go back to my initial joke, our lives are somewhat often lethargic. We may go through the motions, but how much of the energy of how much you have within you is being expressed? So when you think of it, these 5 dimensions are really there for us to access. And when you see a person who's really fully in touch with their innermost self, so all those levels of soul are there in everything that they do, in every moment and every action. Now, that doesn't mean we all can reach that level in a moment, but when you know that's the potential, it can change things. So then you can ask yourself the question, so where do I stand? Am I on the nefesh level, on the ruach level, on the neshama level, on the chaya level, the yechida level? Just to give an example, let's talk about love, relationships. So generally speaking, we talk about 3 levels of compatibility that will define 2 people being attracted to each other. Shidduch, 15th, since it's the 15th of Av, I guess the appropriate example. One is physical attraction, sexual magnetism, something that draws 2 people together. That's the nefesh level. The next is an emotional connection. You can fall in love with an image of a model in a magazine, and then you meet that person and there's nothing there, nothing clicks. There's no feelings. So the next is an emotional compatibility. You know, there's a feeling, something reciprocal, care, sensitivity, empathy. Then there's intellectual compatibility. 2 people, they share ideas, respect each other's opinion, perspective, they can have conversation, can have good argument. Now, most cases, you tell people, what do you think about that? They say, if I had 1 out of the 3, I'd be happy. I hope nobody here would say that, but many people say that. 2 out of the 3, that's a dream. 3 out of the 3 is not even realistic, you know. Now, that's just the first 3 levels. So imagine a relationship that's not just a physical connection. There's some people connect very much physically, but it also has an emotional and intellectual dimensions. That's a pretty good relationship. However, that's just touching the surface of a relationship. Then comes the 4th, the chaya, what I would call spiritual compatibility. What does that mean? That 2 people share a vision for life. What kind of home they want to build, what kind of children they want to bring into this world, what kind of vibe when someone comes into their home. What's the vibe? What mark they want to make in the universe. Why is it different than the first 3? Because the first 3 are subject to change. The 4th is already a transcendent element. It's not so much about, I like what you look like, or I connect with you emotionally, or bond with you intellectually. But this is where both, that's why we have a chuppah, a canopy at a wedding, because the canopy is above the bride and the groom. It's transcendent. It's a connection to the third partner. What is the purpose of life, and how are we going to contribute to that purpose? And Yechida is really reserved for the most intimate connection, where 2 people become like one. Yechida means oneness, total oneness. In the words of the Bible and the Torah, v'haya lebasar echad, where man and woman become like one flesh, physically but also spiritually, like what we call a soulmate. So when you think of it that way, you can develop a whole series of workshops, and I have done that to some extent, of teaching people how to enhance their relationship by first identifying, is it a nefesh, is it ruach, is it neshama, is it chai, yechida? And in each of them, you can always room for improvement and growth. On a collective level, that would be the general relationship we have with God. And what is that relationship? So every day of the year, we pray 3 times a day. You know why 3? Corresponds to nefesh, ruach, and neshama, because we, on a regular mundane weekday, we can connect to the 3 conscious levels, the biological, emotional, and intellectual. On Shabbos and holidays, we add a 4th prayer. It's called Musaf. We introduce the transcendent. That doesn't mean you can't have it at all in the weekdays, except it's not as prominent. And once a year, when do we pray 5 prayers? Great. Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah, the 5th prayer. And what do we say? That prayer, all the gates are open. There are no boundaries. It's complete, unified connection with the essence of the divine and the essence of your soul. Now, that doesn't mean it's not beating inside your chest right now, that yechida. However, it's harder to access. You could access it. All 5 levels are accessible. But it's a question of how easy and how many layers you have to deal with to get to that place. And I'm not even addressing now all the blockages and inhibitions and obstacles and fears and insecurities that even trap us to not even get to the first level of nefesh. So if you really want to do this in a thorough way, you have to also look at, are you even being soulful? I was speaking about someone who's already come to understanding that their soul is more important than their body. And then you go on that journey. Most of us are challenged with, 1 minute, I have bodily needs, I have other needs, I have other things to address. I have to satisfy people's expectations and demands and their perceptions and so on. How many of us are struggling with the demons, real or imagined, in our lives? What we think, other things, people thinking of us, and all that comes with that. Just wanted to qualify. But on the other end, a person who is in the soulful journey is struggling, in a good way, how to climb this ladder, these 5 steps. And each one of them is a whole story of its own, a whole volume of its own. I'm just laying out the basic building blocks. But I want to go one further step. And that is, so what does each one look like? When you dig down deeper, I mentioned before molecular, atomic, subatomic. What are the so-called particles that define each of these 5 levels? So just to broaden it, in Kabbalistic and Hasidic mystical thought, it teaches that everything is microcosm, macrocosm. Whatever exists within ourselves is also exists on the cosmic level, meaning in the worlds around us. That's why you find the concept that I'm sure you're familiar with of the 3, 4, and 5 worlds. Namely, you have, going from bottom up, the world of Asiya, which corresponds to Nefesh, the world of action, the world of Yetzirah, which corresponds to the emotional, to Ruach, the world of Bria, creation, which corresponds to the intellectual, and higher than that is the world of Atzilus, which is Chai, the transcendent, and higher than that is called sometimes Eilumus Ein Sof, the infinite reality, which corresponds to Yechida. So you have that, as I said, on the microcosm and on the macrocosm. And then, of course, everybody's familiar, or I assume you're familiar with the 10 spheres. How does that fit into this? So the 10 spheres as well are broken into 5 categories. You have what's called Chabad, Chagas, Nihi. Those are acronyms for the 10 faculties or parts that every soul is made up of. 3 intellectual ones, Chabad, that's Neshama. 3 emotional ones, which is Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, love, reverence, and compassion. And then comes the last 4, which are the behavioral ones, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, and Malchus, which correspond to Nefesh, to the more biological side. And indeed, a human body, a body itself, without a soul, I don't want to sound morbid, but that's a corpse. When a person is alive, you have these levels of soul beating inside them, and they're all made up of parts. So just as a body needs nourishment We need food, drink, hygiene, rest, exercise. A soul also needs exercise. A soul also needs nourishment. And when you understand the parts that the soul is made of, then you can understand how you nourish it. How do you nourish the behavioral? By behaving in a way that's aligned with your soul. So I recently came up with an idea called immersing yourself in your spiritual spa. SPA is an acronym for Study, Prayer, Action. And those that are more familiar with the text will know that that is the three pillars upon which the world stands. It says, Ashleisha Dvarim Ha'elam Aimed. On three pillars the world stands. And the world here means both the cosmic world and the microcosmic world, which is Elam Katan Zeh Adam, every human being. And what are the three pillars? Torah, study. Avodah, prayer, which is service of the heart, Avodah Shebelev. And Gemilas Chasadim, doing good deeds, kindness, actions. And what are they? There you have, Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh. It's cognitive conditioning, emotional conditioning, and behavioral conditioning. And we can look at ourselves, just as I said before, going to a doctor, there's also a soul doctor. And what does that teach you? That let's look at which part of your life needs some immersion in the spa. So then, hence spa, study, prayer, action. Some of us need the enhancement in our behavioral, some in our emotional, some in our cognitive. The truth is we all need all of them, but you want to focus. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the book I did. It's a different time of the year, called The Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer. It's the 49 days between Passover and Shavuos. And we talk about the refinement of your character. And what does it talk about? Chesed of chesed to malchus of malchus. So I wrote a book that defines literally the x-ray of our emotional structure, the spectrum of our emotions. So for example, many people are very loving. They're very loving. So evaluate your love. Love can be very beautiful, but also if you don't know when to stop. Some people don't know how to stop. Restraint, the gvura of chesed. That's why our love can spoil somebody. Our love could also suffocate someone, because that's like chesed that's untempered. So when you go through the 49 days, you actually have an opportunity to exercise, to evaluate, and then take the spiritual vitamins necessary that nourish and enhance each part of that part of your spiritual makeup. So you see from this that this is an elaborate process. This is like literally can take over your whole life in a beautiful way. Both the 5 dimensions and how they're comprised in the makeup of all the different steps that I spoke about. So really the point that I want to lead to is that this is all happening right now inside of you. Most of us are probably not aware, but inside of you are voices and forces that are waiting for you to feed them. And when you suddenly experience some type of, let's say, anxiety or fear or insecurity, it's always a symptom of your soul telling you need to do something about it. Just like pain. We don't like pain, but pain is a red flag. It's a signal. It's telling you do something about it. The soul can't speak to us in physical terms, so it speaks to us in emotional terms and in psychological terms. Every anxiety is your soul crying out, help me. Not necessarily a distress call, depends on the level of anxiety, but definitely a call that's telling you, I need to be fed. Sadly, we live in a world where we were not taught most of what I just said. So besides the fact that we don't even understand our own voices, we don't even know how to feed them. So what do you do when a person is in that state? Well, this has been essentially the essence of my whole life. My whole life I grew up with this. Once I began to appreciate, and I continue to learn to appreciate this whole inner system, I try my best to help people figure out, firstly, where do you stand, and then what you can do, and make the recommendations of the different soul vitamins, soul exercises, soul spa, and the different terminology to nourish and feed and nurture our very essence of who makes us tick. So yes, we know there's a world of therapy. We know it's probably a $1 trillion industry. No one even knows. And especially if you include the pharmaceutical side of it, the medicine, and how people medicate themselves. If you include all the addictions and all the other things that people struggle with to somewhat relieve their existential angst and pain and loneliness, and then, I mean, it's essentially really so much of what life is defined by. When if a person was able to access and feed that part of their soul, how much would be preempted? How much would be prevented? So what we really need is a revolution, to be very honest. A real revolution that doesn't begin when we're adults. Frederick Douglass said, it's infinitely easier to bring up a healthy child than to fix a broken adult. If we could create a generation of children and teach them about their souls, and they're natural. Remember, they're natural souls, because children by nature are much more driven by imagination, by idealism, by dreams. It's we knock it out of them by saying that's not practical. We turn them into mathematicians, into technicians, figure out how to maneuver and make money in this world. I'm not taking away from any of the value of that, but we basically turn them from soul into bodies instead of fueling their fertile souls and their fertile imagination. But imagine we can create a generation that understands themselves in this way. So the preventive medicine, that would create, who knows the value of that. But when we do face a challenge, you have resources, you have a way of analyzing and saying, 1 second, is this a nephesh thing? Is it a ruach thing? Is it an emotional? Is it a cognitive? Is it a transcendent issue? Is it a combination of some of them? And then specifically drilling down into, is it chachma, bina, das, chesed, gvura, teferes? I gave some examples, obviously a lot more. And all of them will give you a snapshot of what you're like. One of my big dreams, might as well share it, is they're mapping the human genome, right? How about mapping the spiritual genome? Like really creating a comprehensive map that will give us the DNA of every individual soul. So you can look at it and say, ask certain pointed questions and say, okay, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, here are things that need enhancement, here's what needs to be harnessed. How that can create literally a paradigm shift in the way we see ourselves. Really a new psychological model, which can utilize everything that exists out there. That's good. But nevertheless, add this dimension, which is the gift that God gave us. The blueprint I mentioned before, blueprint. The blueprint of Torah, a blueprint of your soul, a blueprint of your psyche. What makes you tick. And when you understand it well, it literally can transform your life. Just like when you get an x-ray of your lungs. I mean, no one should ever have to need that. But if you get an x-ray of your lungs, you'll see the doctor will put the x-ray on the screen. And near it, an x-ray of healthy lungs. So you can juxtapose and say, here there's a, God forbid, a blockage. Here there's a problem here. So it's critical to have a picture of the so-called, the quintessential archetype of what a healthy spiritual genome looks like. And then you could say, okay, now where do I stand in regard to that and grow toward that to create a far better and healthier human being.
If you like that video, hit the subscribe button and notification bell below for hours of the best Jewish content online.